Screen is visible. Rachel, you can see my screen, right?
Yes, also.
Good. Good. I think we've had a few people join in already. Thank you guys. We're just waiting. We're going to start in just a couple of minutes. Everybody who joined, your microphones and cameras are automatically muted. So if you do have any comments or questions, just type them in the chat, please. So as we just get started in 2 more minutes, just giving some more people a bit of time to join. Okay, so we can start. So Rachel.
Brilliant. So thanks everybody for joining and welcome to today's webinar on how to simplify Scope 3 reporting, hosted by Valuechain and Valuechain Innovation Cluster. I'm Rachel Eggington from Valuechain Innovation Cluster, and I'll be monitoring the chat through the session, making sure that we cover all the questions that you have at the end of the webinar. So if you do have any comments, questions, I can see a few of you already put in some things in the chat, just please fill that in as we go along and we'll wrap that all up at the end. So as a background, emissions and carbon reporting are key and critical topics across the supply chain from start to finish. And so today we're going to focus on the Scope 3 reporting element, exploring how that might be relevant to you. So I'd like to hand you over to Nishant, who'll take you through some of those hits and tips for the easiest ways to simplify your Scope 3 reporting.
Thanks, Rachel. So guys, welcome to our first webinar, I would say, and thank you for joining and taking the time to join this. The scope and agenda for today is just to give a starting point and simplify some of the concepts around what Scope 3 are. Um, just as an introduction, I'm Nishant Raj, CEO of Valuechain, where we do supply chain support across industries. And one of the key topics that we are seeing upcoming with any manufacturer right now is carbon reporting and emissions, and the different aspects that are linked into it. So I'll touch upon some of the key topics. Obviously, it's not possible to go into too much detail in just a small webinar, but we'll talk about some of the key topics. We'll answer a few questions and share some of the resources, insights. And at any point, if you have any questions, feel free to put that in chat, and Rachel will bring that up towards the end of the presentation. Okay. So the topics that we'll be touching upon is, a general about Scope 3, some of the key categories, regulations, tools and resources, and some example systems that, again, might drive some insights for people attending today. So firstly, one of the key aspects when you start to think about any manufacturing business is they're spread across different value streams in every manufacturing entity. And each of the value streams and value chains that exist are contributing towards your emissions. And that is a key in terms of identification when you start to actually not just talk about emissions, but trying to understand what as a business you need to focus on and where can you have the biggest bang for the buck. Now, supply chains in general haven't been simple. It weren't simple pre-pandemic, and it hasn't been simple post-pandemic as well. Everything from the Brexit to the pandemic to US elections, the Russia-Ukraine war, the Suez Canal disruption, Red Sea crisis, and many more. The world events that start to impact supply chains and cause massive disruptions, delays, losses, and in a world where data is free flowing to a certain extent, and both structured and unstructured, um, we can do a lot better. But it goes back to individual businesses trying to understand where do they fit into that value chain and what are the aspects they need to focus on. And this doesn't sit separately to what we've been talking about today about emissions and reporting, because as we start to look at supply chains and emissions, it's becoming even more critical that no longer is it the case that manufacturers or any organizations, in big or small, are just onboarding suppliers based on the cost, because the cost is now getting added to your carbon emissions as well. And that then equates to the total cost of ownership. And that's key when most larger companies, where most of the small companies speaking to will be sitting in some tier of that supply chain, have a net zero target, which means that everybody has to be doing their part. So what is Scope 3, right? So let me start off as a very general baseline. Now, some of you might already know this, but for any manufacturer, and any business, there are three aspects of emissions that we talk about. Scope 1, which is during productions, things that you are directly doing where you're creating emissions in the, on the factory, in the manufacturing workplace, and so on. Scope 2 is more offsite, is the uh, energy utilization, and when you're purchasing energy across, from different places, what source of that energy is that renewable, is it non-renewable? And scope 3 then actually is quite wide in covering everything else that's not these two. And that has various components. You have upstream components, which are, how and where are you procuring your parts from? And those parts and the raw material links to those parts, where are they coming from? How much emissions has gone in terms of extracting those raw materials, how much work has been done on that by suppliers, and then adding on to the emissions on that, how much transportation logistics emissions are then captured onto that. Then, you also have other aspects, than the downstream aspects in terms of your products and going to your customer, and that actually creating the emission chain as well. Um, Also things like, your employee commuting, and how much is that contributing towards, because if you have people traveling all over the world to support customers, and to get businesses to attend conferences, they might seem small, but they all start to contribute towards your overall emissions. Now, when we think about reducing scope 3, because scope 1 and scope 2, if you can start to measure that already, and there are lots of methods out there, including companies that are offering low-cost sensors to be able to add to your existing equipment. Being able to see who your energy provider is, what their impact on the emissions aspect is, options to be able to switch to renewables as well. When you look at scope 3, because of the wide scope of it, I think the nature of that becomes a bit overwhelming, and it's difficult for businesses to even know where to actually start that, and what aspect of any of this is going to have a relevant impact to what you need to do. So when we start to look at the upstream impacts, it's quite critical that we are not just going by, as I said, cost of suppliers on its own, because yes, it may be cheaper on paper to actually source components from China, uh, and it might be slightly more costly from getting those same components done, from somebody more local. But when you start to add the impacts of what that logistics and transportation costs are, the risk elements, then you start to actually add the total cost of ownership starts to go up. And this is quite key. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that businesses have to start going and changing the entire supply chains, but it's key to start to understand where is your big aspects of scope 3 emissions happening. Because if it's happening with your critical suppliers, um, there's not a lot that you can do. You can have a more long-term strategy in terms of building alternatives and finding that balance. Whereas if you start to see that a lot of your scope 3 emissions upstream is happening specifically with components that are non-critical, um, then that's something that you should be able to actually drive some more strategic decision making on straight away. And championing that is a key, because while today it might be seen as a nice to have, more and more customers, especially with their ESG assessment stuff, have a preference and a score rating built in internally to utilize suppliers who are more in line with this vision. When we look at downstream, again as well, it's key to be able to again understand, and this varies from business to business and from what products companies are making. Um, how much impact this is causing directly to your scope 3. But again, the key aspect is that we need to make sure that we understand that and how our products are being utilized and what contribution are they making within that emission chain. And having just awareness of that is going to be, again, a key aspect on passing the confidence back to the customers going forward. Now, as we talk about these topics, these are said not just aspects that, okay, these are nice to do and good to do because it's relevant for the environment. More and more, there are key regulations that are coming into play to drive this. Now, in Europe, with CSRD requirements, we're starting to see this become more strict. There was already, with scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, there's already been a key uptake in terms of what the reporting requirements are. But as we start to move forward, scope 3 is also becoming a direct mandate for companies, at a certain size of turnovers, even if, they are non-EU companies and have subsidiaries in EU only. And one of the key thing that highlights is this is not just a country specific thing. This is a global thing, and everybody needs to address that in that manner. We look at US as well, and UK, and each of the countries are starting to drive their own frameworks and assessments. And while at this stage, scope 3 to a certain extent still remains voluntary, it's key for businesses to separate themselves on starting to champion that, because this is not something that you can strategize and solve quickly. It has genuine business impacts and long-term strategic impacts as well. And it's important that companies start to firstly understand where they are with these emissions, understand what's the cause of that, and then start to drive specific actions that will help them. Now, scope 3 in general has multiple components, and this varies massively depending upon what your business is, what you're doing, what sectors you operate in, what products you're making, and so on. Uh, but in general, across all of these, while there's that contribute to your scope 3, um, your supply chain, both upstream and downstream aspects, in general seem to have the most impacts on this. So hence it becomes more critical that if you want to have the biggest ROI for your business, your key activities should not just be planned on to impacting small things, but actually being able to work strategically on things that are going to have the biggest impact on your reductions. Now, having said that, that also means that you have more complicated elements and complex aspects to solve, but that is key. And that's what we've seen as a general trend across industries so far. But this is also means that this is something that you can control, and something that you can strategize around. And there's nothing that exists within these frameworks and requirements that businesses can't get started on their own. You don't always need an expert to support you. There's obviously experts that you can utilize to help you get to a certain level. But as a business, this has to become one of the key performance KPIs that you start tracking. So now I would like to switch to some key examples that we have across our own platforms, and a demo platform that anybody who's interested after the webinar can register for and can use it as a self-service tool to be able to see examples of their emissions. So let me switch. Now, what I'm showing here is Valuechain's supplier portal. Now, this platform in principle is utilized by over 20 plus manufacturing sites today and over 4,000 plus suppliers. Now, the way the system works is it connects on top of existing ERP systems in the manufacturer's businesses, and it doesn't matter what that ERP system is. Now, when we were looking on this topic specifically, and I think one of the things that keeps coming up a lot of times is we don't think the suppliers will share data with us. How much is the dependence on that? How can we actually accurately forecast it? And what the trend we start to see recently is that a lot of uh, even initial level reporting that's happened is coming from average values that you might estimate and get from supplier once in a year. Now, that is still a better starting point than not having it. Um, but a more robust methodology is when you start to automate parts of that link to actually gather that data directly from systems. And as we go towards a world which is more and more connected, we start to see that impact coming into play. So normally when we capture aspects of supply chain and purchase orders from the ERP systems, we actually see the details about who the supplier is, what they're waiting on, who's where their parts coming in from, when are they coming, what's the frequency of those things are, and from that they start to then add in more details in terms of when this objects are being shipped, when what components are there, what the weight of those components are, if you have a tracking number for those components as well from any of the courier services that you would be using. So this was the type of data that we already had available to us. And one of the logical things for us was that because a lot of this data was either a straightforward process or had a minimal input requirement coming in for suppliers, meant that by ingesting that data and being able to utilize that data, we are then able to actually do a key aspect, which is start reporting on those emissions. So you can start to actually see directly which of your suppliers has the most within your supply chain, is contributing most to your emissions. Which mode or transportation model is it utilizing? Is it single transportation model or is it multi-transportation model which is impacting you the most? And this starts to become a more of a real-time feedback system versus something that's only done, once a year. And this also then ties into your forecast because you already know with those suppliers, what you're expecting at what point in time, and you can actually start to forecast and see, what emissions are you going to actually be generating as a part of that. Now, as I said earlier, this starts to give you decision making and analysis inputs on what you can do and what strategies you can put in place. But the key thing it starts to highlight is where are you today? And I think that's the most important step to understand is to understand where is your starting point and is the biggest impact on your scope 3 happening with your critical or non-critical supply chains today. Uh, this also then goes into normally when you are starting to track suppliers and their performances, it's always been on quality, it's been on the cost, it means on delivery and performance. But now what we start to see that is including that you now also start to actually have and customers have an appetite to actually utilize the emissions as a key aspect towards that, because once we start to see this level of data on our day to day, we can make better data-driven decisions to actually combat. And this also acts as a more robust proof of what we are doing to our potential and current customers, and that gives them a lot more confidence with this. So that's something that we have already seen, and this was built as a part of our program with Smart Data Hub in Ulster University, and we already have clients who are now utilizing this to be able to get a better understanding of the emissions. Now, one of the questions we do get asked with any of this is, it's we do not connect right now. We have the potential, but we don't connect into our suppliers' ERP systems or systems. So there's still a manual input that is required. But what we are already able to do as a part of this is, when suppliers are putting in this information, a lot of this information we're already pulling in from the ERP. When suppliers have specific input fields that they have to put in as a part of, when they are updating the platform, uh, we make it as simple as possible to actually make the user access easy. And additional fields can be enabled in the platform, which then add aspects of what are is if the supplier has calculations for the how much emissions they have added on that specific product, even as an average value, then that starts to then combine on top of what you're calculating from the upstream logistics aspect today. So it's possible to track your end to end. It does require you to actually collaborate with your suppliers and supply chain to actually get that information. But the more and more connected that the world's getting, and we are starting to see both suppliers and customers actually starting to have a connected supply chain, you can actually start to automate this data pipeline happening. The other aspect I would like to showcase is this simple demo tool, which is free to utilize, doesn't store your data. So it's basically just stores the data on your cache and then deletes it, as a very simple mechanism with a straightforward template to utilize to actually get a feel for some of your own emissions as an example. And I'll just show that what that looks like. So this platform, which if anybody's interested, you will get a registration link shared by Rachel in a bit, where you can just register your details and you will be able to then get access to this and other resources that we'll be making available post this webinar. So when if we upload some basic data, what we start to see is we've taken data up across the individual suppliers, the locations, the weight of the products, where they're being shipped from, the destinations being shipped from. By taking that type of raw information, which again exists most times with the customer themselves already, because these are known contracts that they would have with the suppliers. When you start to put that in, the system starts to actually give you insights directly on, what your expected emission levels are. It starts to map out based on that data, who are your top 10 suppliers by emission. And that's the type of thing that you need to understand to actually start emission decisions. It also starts to drive for you which of the products are actually, again, most responsible for what's happening in your emission, and how much contribution are they doing that as well. You start to actually also utilize this system to be able to actually get aspects about resilience scoring as well, which means, where are the aspects where the components are critical or non-critical, where you need dual sourcing to be enabled, or some of the other risks that are potentially possible as well. Now, you could see individually. So this is what the data format that we have uploaded. So, the dates, the name of suppliers, the weight, the distance, the method, and then that calculates the carbon emissions as well. And then, what the category of the goods effectively are. The system can obviously be configured to actually drive updates and alerts when things start to happen, and especially on the forecast side as well. But this is a baseline, straightforward tool built with the intent that it's a self-service tool that people can use with example data sets or their own data sets, and they can download the template to utilize that to start to get an understanding of what these key aspects are. Um, Again, if we're happy to take on any questions from anybody later on if they will have any questions about any of the tools and examples. Uh, One thing I would say is that there is no silver bullet for any of this. It does take focus and time. There and you don't have to do any of this alone. But it's quite key to make sure that reach out to us, reach out to anybody in your network, and ask for what you don't know, because that's the only way all of us can start on that journey of increasing our awareness and improving the competency and resilience of our own businesses and supply chains. So I'll switch back to my slide. So having shown that, I think the key aspects then, as we start to go in, is when starting to build your scope 3 strategy, the very important bits to start off is you need to start identifying your gaps. And that needs starts with starting to look at your data, starting to extract that data and be able to investigate that. And there are free assessments that can be utilized to again drive some of those information and support elements as well. From that, you move into actually setting some realistic and actionable goals. Don't be over optimistic to actually schedule in that, okay, you're going to be net zero in the next 2 years. Unless you've gone in and really analyzed where in your supply chain are you actually having these impact. Um, and you need to leverage available support. There is a lot of support that's available within communities, with partners, and knowledge hubs and RTOs that you could reach out to and get support in. And if you don't know where to start, you can always reach out to us as well. So the key next steps and actions, I would say, is there's a bunch of resources that we have curated together that can people can start to utilize to understand what the starting point is, what can they do, who should they connect to, and what's relevant support is available. This includes access to free assessments that have been built, access to the self-service demo platform that we've showcased as well. We also have some experts within our consortium and networks that if you are interested in getting more detailed advice and more thorough look at these, we can connect you to, and there are funding and partnership opportunities that are available. Now, all of these things we do share as a part of our value chain innovation community. That community is not is accessible only by invitation, aimed at innovative startups in manufacturing or manufacturers who want to engage with startups and other innovative companies. But you can again always reach out to me and Rachel, and we can guide you if you can get invited into the platform with that, or if you register for the pack of next steps and actions, we can actually share that with you. So that's it for me, and I'll pass it back to Rachel for questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Nishant. So definitely got a few questions. There's a few on the chat that I'll get to, but one from me in the first instance. So you kind of described scope 3 as being the catch-all for everything else, all these other things, which can be quite overwhelming when you just think, well, how do I even start that? There's so many things. What's your advice for people about how to just prioritize and make the first steps into that journey?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that we have seen across all the data from the research is most businesses will have that scope 3 impact, especially manufacturing businesses, contributing from their upstream, which is the supply chains. And I think that is a good starting point. You can obviously do other small aspects, but looking at your supply chains where you already know who your suppliers are, you know what you're ordering from them, how often, uh, starts to give you a starting point. The other aspect is to be able to, there are some assessments that people can access, and we will recommend them as well. which ask a few questions about your business, your strategies, and how you operate today. And that can again start to give you an insight of where you are. I think that is the key is don't try to do everything. And don't start to set goals that you can complete make your scope three basically be equivalent to zero. But in principle, start small, start to get an understanding and awareness. Have a discussion within your teams and within with your clients, and start to build towards that.
Excellent, thank you. So building blocks on the way rather than overwhelming yourself
Yeah.
completely. There's a few questions on here really around the portals. So firstly, can you ask a supplier to change to a potentially greener manufacturing process? For example, in some cases, additive manufacturing might use far less energy than reductive machining on certain parts. And within the portal, can that then be recorded against the part or the assembly and then demonstrated within the Scope 3 reporting in that sort of dashboard environment?
Yeah. So yes, you can. It always depends on what kind of relationship and you have with that supplier. And again, are they your critical or non-critical suppliers as well? Um, because firstly, supply chain doesn't happen on its own, right? It's through those relationships. Once you start to quantify how much of that is actually being caused by that process, and what impact that is having on you, you can actually have that discussion. And if those suppliers can't actually do that due to various reasons, that's when you start to look at alternative supply chains as well. But the first step towards that is actually quantifying for yourselves and for the suppliers how much is that actually happening, because you only then can you have meaningful conversation and actions happening.
Excellent, thank you. And then a couple of questions. There's sort of two that are very similar around the emissions calculations
Yeah.
on the form. Is that something where actually you're having to put in the emissions data yourselves, or does the tool have the calculation? And if it does, how is it using those values?
Sure. So we take raw input data in the platform. So the raw input data is coming from the ERP systems of the company. So the supply portal tool kit that I showcased, that's a system that is deployed at manufacturers on the site, integrated with the ERP system. So it's pulling in all the raw data about who your supplier is, what they're delivering to you, when they're delivering to you based on purchase orders, what the location of those suppliers are, where are they delivering that to, what frequency as well. And as I showcased, you have asked because it's a collaboration platform, the suppliers are onboarded on the platform as well, and they input the information in terms of uh, we already know based on what the product are, what the weights and stuff are, but any tracking information, so we can actually identify from the courier aspects, is it a multimodal transportation happening? Is it a single modal? And based on the transportation utilizations, there are standard factors that are being bedded into the platform based on research papers as well. And that allows us to actually do the calculation. So the calculations is done by the platform, but the raw data is being pulled from existing systems today. For the second demo platform that we showcased, it's the same approach there as well. We were basically we made where the first one is actually built into a supply portal platform, and you can only access that if you have supply portal. The demo platform, on the other hand, is an open platform that we have built just to simplify this, where people can actually take a CSV upload of their data into their providing those web, and they can download the template in terms of the data that's required, and then it goes into heads and does the calculation for that.
Excellent. And then sort of similarly on the emissions page in the portal, is that a standard format, very standard to the format? Is it standard for industry, or is it customizable?
It's customizable. I mean, we are still in the early days where the customers are starting to utilize that, and we always work with that customer feedback loop in play. And that's key for us because when we start people you start to utilize them day to day, we cater that. But any of the dashboards and reporting are customizable. You can export the calculated data into Excel and actually do your own dashboards in Power BI and other places as well. But we're starting to see, the key things that people want to understand as a part of this is, in my upstream bit specifically, where what's the logistic route that's actually causing most, which of my suppliers are actually, the more are impacting this most, what products are there. So those key pieces of information and calculations are quite key.
Brilliant. And then sort of a bit of a follow up on the calculations from Josh is around, can you input cost data as your raw data, or is it all weight and distance based?
So the current demo tools that you show is seen, and even the live ones, that's based on upstream logistics aspect specifically. But we are able to expand that to add another variable of the aspects of cost data as well. And as I said, in the main platform where supply collaboration happens, we enable field inputs and calculation formulas to be amended as well, to include other weightages for things like, any raw material aspects, and also any of the processes that the supplier is doing. Now, we have to rely on the supplier to input that data, because unless you connect directly to a supply system and be able to record that data, you can't. Now, the technology to do that is already there. It's actually building that relation to actually integrate that aspect up.
Excellent. And I think, it does sound like it relies quite heavily on the suppliers in your process to be engaged and on board with this. And I imagine sometimes people are a little reluctant in the first instance, or maybe just aren't tracking that information already and find it a bit scary to how to start. So how can you encourage those suppliers in your supply chain to get on board with this?
So what we're starting to see in principle across industries is anytime anybody is onboarding suppliers, you have to fill in an ESG form, right? Everybody is starting to become more conscious about this. The data that you're sharing, again, a lot of this data, as I said, already exists with the customer today. They already know who your supplier is, so there's aspects that you can already do. And what you start to drive is, once nobody necessarily not want to share data, it's the fear always is that, okay, why do I need to do that? It's proprietary to me. If you can have the clear message that, it's more for it's more to drive strategic benefits across everybody, and the more understanding and confidence we have in that, the better the relationship would be. That's when it starts to it. So you need to incentivize that, definitely, and that's key for any supplier collaboration to happen, and making it clear in terms of, what is that going to be utilized for, and are we going to get penalized for that as well. And I think that is quite key, is making sure that message is clear. But again, I think what we have seen so far is, if you're clear with that message and have a strategic approach and share what you're trying to do, more suppliers are willing to actually do that rather than not. And it's not just the small suppliers, but there are a lot of instances where your supplier is a much larger group entity compared to you, such as, raw material suppliers. And even those companies are actually more interested to actually share that, because it gets them a market presence and a confidence with their customers, which is what they want to maintain and grow.
Fantastic. And I think maybe the final question of the day then is the age-old question when it comes to reporting, really. How do you balance the right level of accuracy with the right level of cost when trying to do your measuring for Scope 3?
Yeah, so I think that's quite critical. And, with any of these, you can go to nth level of detail and actually spend a lot of money, whereas the most value you're going to get it from the 20% of the work that gives 80% of your value. And I think the key is, as I going back, you need to tie that back to your ROI. You need to tie that back to what the strategy on that is, and what's required in your industry for your customers, and for you to get more customers as well. And there are a lot of quick wins that people can target with that. So, don't try to do an overarching complete strategic change. Start to look at the quick wins, start to quantify what you already can see and capture, and then work from there. And once you start doing that, you start to see the ROI coming back to you, so that, because if you start to know, okay, it can find out, even just by just seeing my data today, uh, where I'm most susceptible to for this, and when these regulations starts to come in, how that's going to impact me, then, it's your cost to value starts to come into play straight away.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Nishant. There are some links in the chat, everybody. Firstly, to take you to the Scope 3 support, and then also for finding out a little bit more about the Value Chain Innovation Cluster. Do get in touch with Nishant or myself, and we'd love to chat with you more about this.
Absolutely. And if anybody wants to scan the QR code to connect with me on LinkedIn, please do so, or contact, drop me an email. But thank you for joining. Hope it was useful and drove at least some insights for everybody. And if anybody is interested in accessing any of the Scope 3 packs that we've created, just register and we'll send that over to you.
Right.
Great. And I think the recording of this webinar will be available as well for you to see or share with any of your colleagues. Great. So we finished. Thank you.